Before sunrise, Block D stood frozen for roll call. 4 years in this place, and he still thinks silence makes him untouchable.
Let's see how long that lasts.
May sensed something was wrong.
This place is too quiet. It feels like everyone is waiting for something bad.
Then she reached Caleb Monroe's name.
Caleb Monroe, this is your second call. Answer the count now.
Caleb remained silent. Ronan noticed the silence.
You hear them calling your name, Ghost. Answer them, or I will make this whole block remember why nobody ignores me.
Ronan ruled through fear.
Every man in this block has something to lose. A mother, a daughter, a parole hearing, a secret. Tell me, Caleb, what do you still have left?
Ronan humiliated him publicly.
Not a word. Not a threat. That is what happens when a man forgets he belongs to someone stronger.
Caleb gave him nothing.
You think fear makes you powerful. It only proves you are terrified of anyone who refuses to kneel.
Warden Vale arrived.
This prison survives because every man understands his place. Mr. Monroe has spent 4 years pretending he is above that rule. Write him up for defiance. Send him to laundry detail. Some lessons are easier to understand when no one is watching.
They said you hurt people who trust you. Please tell me they are lying.
That night, Mateo was found dead.
His wrists were restrained. His shoes are still on. This was not suicide. Someone made it look like one.
The officers behind Caleb heard the words, but none of them wanted to understand them. In Black Ridge, truth was not measured by what a man could prove. It was measured by who had the authority to write the report. And before Mateo's body was even taken away, Caleb could already see how the lie would be built. The bruises would be called confusion. The knot would be called desperation. The shoes would be ignored entirely. By morning, Mateo Ruiz would become another official tragedy. Another inmate who could not survive his own guilt. Another name removed from the meal roster, as if he had never been more than a number. But Caleb knew better. He had seen this pattern before. A frightened prisoner became unstable on paper. A camera failed at the perfect moment. A guard forgot what he had seen, and a doctor signed faster than any honest man should. Mateo was not the first. That was the part Caleb could not say out loud. Not yet. Because inside Black Ridge, speaking too soon did not save the dead. It only warned the living men who had killed them. The next morning, Mateo's cell was empty. His name had already been removed from the meal roster. His belongings were packed in a box for a family that would receive them with a letter full of words like regret and condolences. At roll call, Warden Vale paused beside Caleb. This time, Ronan Pike stood nearby with a fresh cut on his lip from an unrelated fight and an expression that suggested he was enjoying himself. Vale asked Caleb whether he had anything to say about Mateo Ruiz. Caleb looked at him. For the first time in years, every man in Block D waited for an answer. But Caleb remained silent. Vale sighed, as if disappointed by a child. Then he announced that a recording had been recovered from the previous evening. According to the recording, Caleb had threatened Mateo shortly before he died. Officer Doran felt her stomach tighten. She had listened to the audio in the security office 20 minutes earlier. The voice was distorted, low, and difficult to hear. But the report stated with confidence that it belonged to Caleb Monroe. She had never heard Caleb speak. None of the guards had, at least not in her presence. Yet Warden Vale said the evidence was conclusive. Caleb was placed in restraints and taken toward segregation. As 2 officers gripped his arms, he turned his head slightly toward Officer Doran. His face did not show panic. It did not show anger. But for the first time, she saw urgency in his eyes. When they passed close enough, something small touched the floor near her shoes. A folded piece of paper. She waited until the corridor was empty before picking it up. There were only 3 words written on it. Count the missing. Officer May Doran stood alone beneath the cold lights, staring at the note while the sounds of Black Ridge continued around her. Doors slammed. Men shouted from distant cells. A guard laughed somewhere down the hall. The prison moved on because prisons always moved on. But she could not stop thinking about Mateo Ruiz. She could not stop thinking about Caleb's eyes. And she could not stop thinking about the fact that the official report had called Mateo's death a suicide before the body had even been taken to the infirmary. That evening, May opened the prison record system from an unused desk in the administrative wing. She searched for inmate deaths over the past 8 years. There were 17. At first, the number meant nothing. Then she began to read the names. One had been listed as an overdose in the kitchen storage area. One had fallen from a maintenance staircase. 2 had allegedly fought each other until one bled out. 7 had been declared suicides. 3 had died from medical complications that were never fully explained. And 3 had been transferred out of Blackridge with no receiving facility recorded. The more May read, the more one detail appeared again and again. Every report had been signed by Warden Curtis Vale. Every report had been reviewed by the same internal medical officer. And every one of the dead men had spent time in Block D before they died. May closed the file and sat back slowly. For the first time since arriving at Blackridge, she understood why the prison felt wrong. It was not because the inmates were dangerous. It was because someone had built an entire system around making danger look ordinary. And somewhere in segregation, behind a steel door and a silence that had lasted 4 years, Caleb Monroe was waiting. Not for rescue, not for revenge. For someone finally to start counting. May Doran did not sleep that night. She tried to tell herself that the files could still have innocent explanations. Prisons were ugly places. Men died in ugly ways. Records were often incomplete because nobody cared enough to make them complete. That was what she had been taught in training. There were policies, procedures, review boards, audits. There were always forms. And where there were forms, people liked to believe there was accountability. But the more May looked at the deaths connected to Block D, the less they resembled chaos. Chaos had no pattern. This did. At 2:14 in the morning, she opened the file of the first inmate on Caleb Monroe's list. His name was Darius Kemp. Official cause of death: accidental overdose. He had been found in a kitchen storage room with a plastic bag of pills near his body. The report stated that he had a long history of substance abuse and had become increasingly unstable in the days before his death. May read the report twice. Then she noticed something odd. Darius Kemp had been on medical restriction at the time. He had not been assigned kitchen duty. He had not been allowed near the storage room. And according to the movement logs, his cell door had never been opened that night. Someone had signed him out anyway. The signature belonged to Officer Jared Hume. May searched Hume's employment history. He had resigned 3 weeks after Kemp died. No explanation. No follow-up interview. No forwarding address in the personnel file. The second file was worse. A man named Wesley Grant had supposedly fallen from a maintenance platform while repairing a ceiling vent. The report said he had ignored safety instructions. Yet Wesley had been 61 years old, had severe arthritis in both knees, and had never worked maintenance a day in his life. His assignment was library cart duty. The photo attached to the incident report showed a smear of blood on the wall behind him, high above the floor. May had seen enough training photos to know what that meant. Wesley had not fallen first. He had been hit first. By sunrise, May had read 7 files. By breakfast, she had stopped trying to convince herself that Caleb Monroe might be wrong. The problem was that being right did not make him safe. It made him dangerous to the people who had buried those 17 names. And now May had become dangerous too. She spent the next day pretending nothing had changed. She followed orders. She checked cell doors. She carried her clipboard through Block D with the same stiff posture she had used since her first shift. She did not look at Caleb's empty place in the line during morning count. She did not ask about Mateo Ruiz. She did not mention the note. But every time she passed Warden Vale, she studied him more carefully. Curtis Vale was good at appearing ordinary. That was part of what made him frightening. He did not pace like a villain. He did not shout at officers. He did not carry himself like a man hiding secrets. He wore clean shirts, spoke in measured sentences, and remembered the names of staff members' children. He praised discipline. He talked about second chances. He visited church groups when they toured the prison. He had once received an award from the state for reducing violence inside Blackridge. May had seen the plaque in the lobby. Now she wondered how many bodies had been buried beneath it. Late that afternoon, Vale called her into his office. The room was neat in the deliberate way of a man who wanted people to believe he had nothing to hide. Framed certificates hung behind his desk. A small American flag stood near the window. On the shelf beside it sat a photograph of Vale, shaking hands with the governor, both men smiling as though the world outside the prison had no reason to fear what happened inside it. May stood in front of his desk while he studied a file. He asked whether she was settling in. She said she was. He asked whether Block D had been difficult. She said it was different from her last assignment. Vale smiled at that. He said Black Ridge had a way of teaching people the difference between danger and drama. Most new officers, he explained, mistook inmate behavior for chaos. In reality, the prison ran best when everyone understood their place. Then he mentioned Caleb Monroe. He said Monroe was intelligent, educated, patient. The most dangerous kind of inmate, in Vale's opinion, was not the one who threw punches. It was the one who made other people doubt what they had seen. May listened carefully. Vale told her that Caleb had spent years manipulating staff through silence, that his refusal to speak was not discipline, but control, that young officers often projected nobility onto quiet men because they mistook restraint for innocence. Then Vale leaned back in his chair and said something that chilled her. He said Mateo Ruiz had made the same mistake. May kept her face blank. Vale continued. He said Mateo had become convinced Caleb was trying to help him. He said that when frightened people became desperate, they sometimes followed the wrong person. And when they realized they had trusted a monster, they broke. May wanted to ask him how he knew that. She wanted to ask why he had personally signed Mateo's report less than an hour after the body was found. Instead, she nodded once and said she understood. Vale dismissed her. As she turned toward the door, he added that she should be careful with records. He said Black Ridge had a way of punishing people who spent too much time looking backward. May did not stop walking. But when the door closed behind her, she understood the warning for what it was. He knew someone had opened the files. He just did not know who. That night, May went to segregation. Officially, she was there to check the restraint log. Unofficially, she needed to see Caleb Monroe before Warden Vale found a reason to move him somewhere nobody could reach. Segregation sat beneath the older part of the prison, where the walls sweated in summer and the pipes groaned all winter. The cells were narrow, the lights never fully dimmed, and the air carried the stale smell of bleach, rust, and old fear. Caleb was sitting on the edge of his bunk when May arrived. His hands were cuffed in front of him. A bruise had darkened along the side of his jaw. His lower lip was split. Someone had hurt him after he was brought down there, and someone had made sure the report would say he resisted. May stood outside the door for several seconds. Caleb did not look up. Finally, she spoke quietly. She told him she had counted the missing. At that, his eyes lifted. They were not grateful. They were not relieved. They were tired. May told him she had found 17 deaths connected to Block D. She said the reports did not make sense. She said she believed Mateo had been murdered. Caleb watched her without moving. Then he looked toward the ceiling camera. May followed his eyes. The camera above the cell door was old and scratched, but the small red light was on. Caleb looked back at her. He pressed one finger against his lips. May understood. He would not speak. Not there. Not yet. She asked whether there was a way to communicate without being heard. Caleb looked down at the metal food tray beside him. Then he tapped it once with his cuffed hand. A short sound. He tapped again, twice. Then once more. May frowned. Caleb repeated the pattern. One tap. Two taps. One tap. Then he pointed to the cell number painted beside his door. It's 121. May stared at the numbers. 1, 2, 1. She did not understand until he tapped the tray again. One tap. Two taps. One tap. A code. Not letters exactly, not yet. Caleb watched her think. Then he lifted his fingers and made a small gesture near his chest. His index finger traced a shape in the air. Another gesture followed. Then another. May recognized it. Sign language. Not fluent, not enough for a conversation, but enough for a question. Who listens? Caleb's hands moved again. Not guards, not cameras. People. May stood very still. Then she remembered the men she had seen around the prison, who seemed almost invisible. The deaf inmate in the infirmary, who communicated with a correctional aide. The old man, who pushed the library cart and never looked anyone in the eye. The kitchen worker who had spent so long scrubbing floors that officers barely noticed him anymore. The men who swept corridors, repaired vents, collected laundry, cleared trays, washed dishes, and delivered supplies. The people nobody watched, because everyone assumed they had nothing to say. May looked at Caleb. He had not been alone. Not for 4 years. The next morning, she began noticing what Blackridge had trained her not to notice. In the laundry room, a young deaf inmate named Aaron Bell folded uniforms with perfect precision. He never spoke. Most officers treated him like furniture. But when May entered, Aaron glanced toward the security camera, then toward a stack of shirts marked for the night shift. He touched 2 fingers to his shoulder, then 3 to his wrist. May watched him repeat the movement. It was not random. Later, in the chow hall, an elderly inmate named Luther Webb placed trays on tables. His back was bent, and one hand shook from age. Nobody paid attention when he dropped a spoon. Nobody paid attention when he picked it up and tapped it against the floor twice before moving on. In the infirmary, a man named Felix Romero cleaned the hallways. He had a reputation for being slow and harmless. But when Officer Brigg passed him, Felix's eyes followed the man with a sharpness May had not expected. Officer Nolan Brigg was one of Vale's oldest staff members. He had been at Blackridge for nearly 15 years. He was broad-shouldered, heavy-faced, and always smelled faintly of mint gum. Most guards thought of him as dependable. He was the one who helped calm fights, the one who took extra shifts, the one Vale trusted to handle difficult inmates. But May had seen his name in 6 of the 17 death files. Every time it appeared, it was somewhere near the final movement log. A door opened. A prisoner transferred. A camera malfunctioned. A report signed. May started keeping notes. Not in the prison system, not on her phone. She bought a cheap notebook from the vending area outside the staff lot and hid it beneath the lining of her work bag. Every day, she wrote down names, times, gestures, and patterns. Aaron Bell, shoulder 2, wrist 3. Luther Webb, spoon taps 2 and 1. Felix Romero, watches Brigg, not Vale. Laundry uniform tags, irregular numbers. Block D deaths, all linked to Old City cases. The more she watched, the clearer the shape became. Caleb had built a network of witnesses inside Blackridge. Not with threats, not with promises, with attention. He had listened when no one else did. He had remembered people who had spent years being treated as disposable. And in return, they had become his eyes. 3 days after Mateo Ruiz died, Caleb was moved out of segregation and assigned to laundry detail. Officially, Warden Vale claimed that isolation had not improved his behavior. In reality, May suspected Vale wanted Caleb somewhere easier to control. The laundry room was below ground, far from visitors, far from administrative cameras, and full of loud industrial machines that could drown out almost anything. When Caleb arrived, Ronan Pike was already there. He stood near the steam press with 2 men from his crew, both larger than Caleb, and both wearing the blank expression of people who had learned to enjoy cruelty because it made them feel less afraid. Ronan smiled when Caleb entered. No one spoke. The guards at the door looked away. Caleb was handed a stack of uniforms and directed toward the far table. He worked without complaint, shirt after shirt, pants after pants, gray fabric, white name tags, blue thread, metal snaps. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then Ronan's men began dropping soaked linens onto Caleb's table. Extra loads, heavy bags, blood-stained sheets from the infirmary, towels marked with brown water and chemical residue. Every few minutes, one of them bumped his shoulder or kicked the cart near his feet. Caleb ignored them. That was what Ronan hated most. He could not understand a man who refused to perform fear. Near noon, one of Ronan's men pushed a bundle of uniforms into Caleb's arms hard enough to knock him backward. The bundle tore open. Shirts spilled across the floor. The guards laughed. Caleb bent down and began collecting them. As he did, he noticed something sewn into the inside collar of one shirt. A small red stitch, not part of the official tag. A deliberate mark. He turned the shirt over slowly. The name strip read, Officer Nolan Brigg. Caleb glanced toward Aaron Bell. Aaron was folding towels at the next station. Without lifting his head, he tapped his thumb against his wrist twice, then placed 3 fingers against his shoulder. 2, 3. May's notes. Shoulder 2, wrist 3. The code did not make sense until Caleb looked at the stitched number on Brigg's sleeve. B23. Block B, locker 23. The mark in the collar was not random. It was a map. Caleb folded the shirt carefully and placed it in the finished stack. Then he kept working. That evening, May received an unexpected assignment. She was told to inspect locker rooms in Block B because several officers had complained about missing personal items. It was the kind of task that sounded pointless, which made it perfect. She carried a clipboard, checked off numbers, and waited until the hallway emptied. Locker 23 belonged to Officer Nolan Brigg. It was locked. May tried the master key. It did not work. That alone was suspicious. Officer lockers were not supposed to have private locks, not unless an officer had installed one without authorization. May did not force it open. Not yet. Instead, she crouched near the bottom and examined the scratches around the frame. Fresh marks, a hinge recently removed and reattached. Someone had opened it from the side. She looked down the hall. No one was coming. Using the edge of a thin ruler from her clipboard, she slid it through the gap near the hinge and felt along the inside panel. Her fingers found something taped beneath the locker shelf. A small flash drive. May held it in her palm. For a second, she imagined taking it straight to the State Inspector General. She imagined calling an outside investigator. She imagined the relief of putting the evidence in the hands of people who could make arrests. Then she remembered Warden Vale's office. She remembered the governor's photograph. She remembered how quickly Mateo's death report had been finished. And she knew the truth. Whatever existed inside that flash drive had survived this long because nobody important had seen it. If she moved too early, it would disappear. She taped it back exactly where she found it. Then she walked away. That night, Caleb sat alone in his cell after laundry detail. His hands were sore. His shoulders ached. Ronan's men had spent the afternoon finding small ways to hurt him without leaving obvious marks. A knee against the ribs while passing a cart. A hot sheet dropped across his forearm. A shove into the metal edge of a folding table. Caleb had endured worse. Pain was simple. Silence was harder. He had not heard his sister's voice in 4 years. He had not seen his niece grow beyond the age of 6 in the photograph that lived inside his mind. Sometimes, in the dark, he tried to remember whether her front tooth had already fallen out before he went to prison. Sometimes, he imagined her walking into school with a backpack too big for her shoulders. Sometimes he wondered whether she still asked where Uncle Caleb was, or whether Naomi had learned to say his name less often because it hurt too much. The first year inside Blackridge, Caleb had received letters from Naomi every week. She wrote about ordinary things, grocery bills, her daughter's school play, the old apartment building where the elevator kept breaking. She wrote that she believed him. She wrote that she would never stop looking for a way to prove the truth. Then, one day, the letters stopped. At first, Caleb thought she was angry. Then he thought she had given up. Months later, Ronan Pike had walked past his cell and left a photograph on the floor. Naomi standing outside a pharmacy. Her daughter beside her. A dark sedan parked across the street. No message, no threat, just the photograph. Caleb understood. Warden Vale had reached beyond the prison walls. The silence was no longer a choice. It was ransom. The following morning, May found another folded note beneath the tray slot of Caleb's cell. She had not seen anyone place it there. The handwriting was not Caleb's. It said only this: "They move him Friday." May read it twice. Friday was 2 days away. She knew immediately what it meant. A transfer. Blackridge used transfers the way other institutions used locked doors. A man sent away in the middle of the night could vanish into another system. His records could be delayed. His property could be misplaced. His visitors could be told nothing. If he arrived at the new prison at all, nobody would ask too many questions. May hurried to the assignment board. There it was. Caleb Monroe. Federal transport request. Friday, 11:40 p.m. Destination: Red Hollow Correctional Facility. May had heard of Red Hollow. Everyone had. It was 3 states away, isolated, overcrowded, and notorious for the kind of violence that never made the news unless someone important died. A man like Caleb would not last long there, especially if Warden Vale made sure the right people knew he was coming. May stood in front of the board, feeling the blood drain from her face. She had 2 days. 2 days to find proof strong enough to stop a transfer. 2 days to figure out what was inside Briggs' locker. 2 days before, Caleb Monroe became another missing name. And somewhere in Black Ridge, Ronan Pike was preparing for something bigger than a beating in the laundry room. because men like Ronan did not waste effort on enemies they planned to kill quietly. They only made a spectacle when someone needed to be taught a lesson. By Thursday morning, the rumor had already spread through Block D. There was going to be a riot. Not a real riot, a controlled one. The kind that began with one fight, then another, then a locked door at the wrong time, and a guard who arrived too late. The kind that gave administrators a reason to move prisoners, destroy property, and blame the dead for everything. Caleb knew the pattern. He had seen it before, years ago, in police reports from other prisons. A disturbance created confusion. Confusion created missing minutes. And inside missing minutes, people died. At roll call, Ronan Pike stood 3 spaces away from Caleb. His face looked calm. Too calm. When Officer Doran passed, he made a small gesture near his waist, hidden from the guards. 1 finger down. Then 2. Then 3. Caleb saw it. Friday, 11:40. The transfer was not the plan. It was the cover. The riot would happen before the transport arrived. And by the time the doors opened again, Caleb Monroe would either be dead or blamed for setting the whole prison on fire. For the first time in 4 years, Caleb felt something close to fear. Not for himself, for the people who had trusted him. For Aaron Bell in the laundry room. For Luther Webb with his shaking hand. For Felix Romero, who cleaned blood from floors no one else wanted to see. For May Doran, who had stepped into a war she did not understand because she had chosen to count the dead. And for Naomi, somewhere outside the walls, still living under a threat Caleb had never been able to explain. Caleb closed his eyes for one brief moment. Then he opened them. The time for silence was almost over. But before he could speak, he would need to make sure the truth survived long enough to be heard. Friday arrived under a sky the color of dirty steel. From the outside, Black Ridge looked almost peaceful that morning. The watchtowers stood against the clouds. The razor wire glistened with rain. Delivery trucks rolled through the outer gate. Officers changed shifts with coffee in their hands and tired expressions on their faces. Nothing about the prison suggested that, by midnight, the truth buried inside its walls would be fighting to survive. But in Block D, everyone could feel it. The silence was different. It was no longer the ordinary silence of men protecting themselves. It was the silence that came before something planned, something rehearsed, something too large to stop with a simple order or a locked door. Ronan Pike spent the morning moving through the block with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what would happen next. He spoke little, but he did not need to. His crew had already received their instructions. A tray would be thrown in the chow hall. One man would start a fight. Another would pull the fire alarm. A third would jam a security gate. Once the officers rushed toward the noise, the cameras in the east corridor would fail for just long enough. Then Caleb Monroe would disappear. The official report would be written before sunrise. It would say he had organized the riot. It would say he had attacked staff. It would say officers had used necessary force. And somewhere, in a transport van that would never leave Black Ridge, there would be no witness left alive to contradict it. Caleb knew all of this before the first tray hit the floor. He knew because Aaron Bell had passed him a towel in the laundry room that morning. Sewn into the corner, so small that no guard would notice it, was a sequence of marks. 3 stitches near the edge, 2 along the seam, 1 beneath the tag. 3, 2, 1. In their growing code, it meant one thing. They are ready. Caleb had spent the previous night thinking about every person Warden Vale could hurt if the plan succeeded. May Doran, Aaron, Luther, Felix. The men who had quietly helped him gather pieces of the truth. The people who had survived by becoming invisible. For 4 years, Caleb had believed silence was the only way to protect them. Now he understood something else. Silence could protect a person for only so long. Eventually, silence became the room where evil learned to speak freely. At noon, May Doran entered the staff locker corridor with a file folder under one arm and a borrowed maintenance key in her pocket. She had made her decision. She could not wait for the Inspector General. She could not wait for a judge, a warrant, or a supervisor who might already belong to Vale. Caleb was being moved that night. The riot was coming, and whatever was hidden in Officer Briggs' locker might be the only evidence strong enough to stop it. The hallway was empty. May stood in front of locker 23 and listened. Nothing. She tried the master key again, As before, it did not fit. Then she took out the thin maintenance tool she had hidden beneath her sleeve. It was not elegant, it was not official, but it was enough to remove the hinge pins one by one. Her hands shook as she worked. She thought of the warning in Vale's office. She thought of Mateo Ruiz hanging in his cell while strangers decided what his death meant. She thought of Caleb's note. Count the missing. When the final hinge pin came loose, May pulled the locker door forward. Inside, at first, there was nothing unusual. A spare uniform, a bottle of aspirin, an old pair of boots, a photograph of Brig with his wife and 2 daughters at a lake. Then May pressed against the back panel. It moved. Behind it sat a sealed plastic case. Inside the case were 6 flash drives, a small digital recorder, and a stack of printed transfer forms bearing the names of prisoners who had officially died years earlier. May stared at the pages. Darius Kemp, Wesley Grant, Mateo Ruiz, and 14 others. There were also 3 names she had never seen in the death files because they had not been recorded as deaths at all. They had been listed as transfers. One of those names made her stop breathing. Arthur Bell. The witness Caleb Monroe had supposedly murdered 4 years earlier. May read the form again. Arthur Bell had entered Blackridge under a false inmate identification number 21 days after Caleb had been convicted. His name had been altered. His transfer had been sealed. His destination was listed as Internal Protective Custody. There was no release record, no death certificate, no medical file, nothing. But on the form, beside the date, was a handwritten note. Bell still talking. Move before review. May's knees nearly gave out. Arthur Bell had been alive. Caleb had not murdered him. The case against Caleb had not merely been false. It had been built on a lie so complete that the man they claimed was dead had been hidden inside the same prison where Caleb was sent to disappear. May grabbed the recorder. She pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then a man's voice emerged, weak and frightened. It was Arthur Bell. He was speaking quickly, as though he knew time was running out. He named companies. He named officers. He named payments that had passed through charities, construction firms, security contracts, and police accounts. He described how evidence was planted, how witnesses were pressured, how people who would not cooperate were moved into systems where no one outside could find them. Then he said a name May already knew. Curtis Vale. The recording ended with a sound like a door opening, then silence. May stood in the locker room with the recorder clenched in her hand. For 1 second, she imagined running, not from the truth. With it, out through the staff entrance, into her car, straight to the nearest state police office. But then she looked at the clock. 12:37 p.m. The riot was coming in less than 11 hours, and Caleb was still inside. She copied every file onto a second drive she had brought from home. Then she placed the originals back inside the case exactly as she had found them. The recorder, however, she kept. It was not enough to prove everything, but it was enough to begin. At 6:10 that evening, the first sign of trouble appeared in the chow hall. A metal tray crashed to the floor. Every head turned. A prisoner from Ronan Pike's crew stood over another inmate, shouting about stolen food. The argument lasted only seconds before a punch was thrown. Then another. Men surged backward from the tables. Guards rushed in. Chairs scraped across concrete. The fight was loud. Too loud. Too organized. Caleb sat at the far end of the room, watching the exits. He saw Ronan rise from his seat. He saw Officer Brig move toward the east corridor. He saw the overhead lights flicker once. Then the fire alarm began to scream. Panic spread faster than violence. Men stood. Tables overturned. Guards shouted commands no one could hear. The east security gate slammed halfway shut and then froze. Smoke began to drift from a utility vent near the kitchen, thin at first, then darker. The riot had started exactly as planned, but Caleb had prepared for it too. Luther Webb, the old library worker everyone ignored, had spent the past 2 days moving books from one cart to another. Hidden inside the hollowed-out spine of an old legal textbook was a small brass key. It opened a storage door near the chapel corridor, a door no officer used anymore because the room behind it had been declared structurally unsafe. Felix Romero, the cleaner, had quietly removed the screws from a rusted vent cover beneath the chapel steps. Aaron Bell had sewn location codes into the laundry tags, and May Doran had left the chapel service entrance unlatched. It was not a perfect plan. It was not even a safe one. But it gave the weakest prisoners in Block D somewhere to go when the violence began. Caleb stood from his seat. For the first time, Ronan Pike looked directly at him with something more than contempt. He looked afraid. Ronan had expected Caleb to panic, to run, to fight, to become the monster Warden Vale needed him to be. Instead, Caleb began moving men toward the chapel corridor. Not his friends, not just the people who had helped him, anyone who was trapped. An older inmate with a cane, a young man shaking so hard he could barely stand. 2 prisoners from another unit who had no idea what was happening, a kitchen worker bleeding from the forehead. Caleb guided them through the smoke and noise with the same steady focus he had once used when he investigated scenes where everyone else had already decided the truth. Behind them, Ronan's crew began pushing toward the east gate. Officer Briggs shouted for Caleb to stop. Caleb did not. A guard grabbed his shoulder. Caleb twisted free, not with violence, but with the practiced movement of a man who understood balance and timing. The guard stumbled backward into the crowd. Caleb kept moving. Then Ronan Pike stepped into his path. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to narrow. Smoke curled through the lights. Men shouted. The alarm screamed. Somewhere, glass broke. Ronan looked at Caleb with rage burning behind his eyes. He had waited 4 years to make Caleb react. Now, at last, he had his chance. Ronan swung first. The punch came hard and wild. Caleb stepped aside. Not dramatically. Not like a fighter showing off for a crowd. Just enough. Ronan's fist missed and struck the concrete wall. He cursed and turned again. This time, Caleb did not hit him. He caught Ronan's wrist, pulled him forward, and used Ronan's own momentum to force him off balance. Ronan fell against a table, knocking the breath from his lungs. Caleb leaned close enough for Ronan to hear him over the alarm. Then, after 4 years of silence, Caleb spoke. His voice was low, rough, and controlled. He told Ronan that fear only worked while people believed they were alone. Ronan froze. Caleb released him. Then he walked away. That was all. No brutal beating, no revenge, no show of strength. And somehow, that was worse for Ronan than any punch could have been. Because in that moment, the men around them saw that Caleb Monroe had never been afraid of him. The chapel corridor was already filling with prisoners when May arrived. Her uniform was stained with smoke. The recorder was hidden inside her vest. In one hand, she carried a ring of keys. In the other, a radio that had gone silent after someone cut the internal signal. She found Caleb near the old storage room. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then May held up the recorder. Caleb looked at it. His face changed. Not with surprise, with grief. He knew what it was before she said anything. Arthur Bell, alive after all, hidden in Black Ridge, murdered after Caleb's conviction was secured. May told him they had proof. Not enough for every crime, maybe not enough for every name, but enough to bring outside investigators inside the prison. Enough to stop the transfer. Enough to destroy Vale's story. Caleb looked toward the smoke-filled hallway. Then he looked at the frightened prisoners gathered near the chapel door. He knew proof alone would not save them tonight. Vale still controlled the prison. And somewhere above them, the warden was waiting for the riot to become bloody enough that no one would question whatever happened next. May led Caleb through the chapel storage room. Behind a cracked wall panel was a narrow passage built decades earlier for maintenance access. It ran beneath the administrative wing and ended near the old records office. Most staff had forgotten it existed, but Caleb had not. Years before, when he first entered Black Ridge, he had noticed the architecture. Old prisons told stories through their walls. Doors were moved, corridors were sealed. Rooms vanished from maps, but not from memory. At the end of the passage stood a steel door. Behind it was the abandoned records room. May unlocked it. Inside, dust covered the shelves. Broken monitors sat beneath plastic sheets. Old paper files filled boxes stacked to the ceiling. And in the far corner, hidden behind a cabinet, was a control panel linked to the prison's original public address system. The system had been disconnected from the main office years ago, but not completely. Caleb stared at it. May understood immediately. She placed the recorder beside him. Outside, the riot grew louder. A heavy impact shook the ceiling. Then the door behind them slammed shut. Ronan Pike stood on the other side. He had followed them. With him were Officer Brigg and 2 guards loyal to Vale. May reached for the keys. Too late. Brigg forced the door open. He looked at the recorder in May's hand, then at Caleb standing beside the old control panel. For the first time, Brigg's expression lost its calm. He knew. He knew the truth had survived. Brigg pulled his baton free. He told May to hand over the recorder. She refused. One of the guards grabbed her arm. Caleb stepped forward. Brigg swung the baton toward his ribs. Caleb raised his forearm, taking the strike. Pain flashed through him, but he stayed upright. Brigg swung again. This time, Caleb moved inside the arc of the weapon, caught Brigg's wrist, and drove his shoulder into the officer's chest. Brigg staggered backward into a shelf of old files. Papers burst into the air. The second guard rushed Caleb. Caleb turned, blocked the man's arm, and pushed him into the wall hard enough to knock the wind from him. The third guard hesitated. That hesitation was enough. May tore free, hit the emergency switch beside the panel, and the old public address system came alive with a burst of static. Every speaker in Blackridge crackled. The riot stopped for one breath. Caleb stood in the middle of the records room, his chest rising and falling, blood running from his forearm where the baton had struck him. For 4 years, he had refused to let Blackridge hear his voice. Now the entire prison was listening. At first, nothing came out. The silence stretched. Then Caleb spoke. He did not scream. He did not accuse. He began with a name, Darius Kemp. He gave the date of Darius's death, the cell number, the officer who signed the movement log. Then he said Wesley Grant, Mateo Ruiz, Arthur Bell. One by one, Caleb read the names of the 17 missing men. He read each name slowly. He gave the details no official report had wanted remembered. The times, the false transfers, the broken cameras, the officers present, the reports altered, the evidence hidden. Across Blackridge, men stopped fighting. Some stood frozen in corridors. Some lowered weapons they had picked up during the chaos. Some looked at the guards with new fear in their eyes. And in the administration wing, Warden Curtis Vale listened as his entire prison became a witness against him. May connected the recorder to the system. Arthur Bell's voice filled the speakers. Weak, frightened, undeniable. He named Vale. He named Brigg. He named the network that had destroyed Caleb Monroe's life. Then the recording ended. For a moment, there was only static. Then another voice came through the radio on May's belt. State Emergency Response Team. They had received an automatic distress signal when the fire alarm system was triggered. May had also sent a scheduled evidence package to an outside journalist earlier that afternoon, using a delayed transmission she had set before the riot began. The files from Brigg's locker were already leaving Blackridge. Vale could no longer bury them. The warden's final mistake was believing he controlled every door. He did not know May had opened one before he ever tried to close it. Within minutes, state officers entered the prison through the emergency gate. The riot was contained not by force alone, but by the sudden collapse of the lie holding it together. Guards who had served Vale began stepping away from him. Some tried to deny everything. Some claimed they had only followed orders. A few looked relieved that the truth had finally arrived. Officer Brigg was arrested in the records room. The cuffs were placed on his wrists by men he had once supervised. Ronan Pike was found near the east corridor, sitting against the wall with his injured hand pressed to his chest. No one from his crew stood beside him. The men who had feared him for years had scattered when they realized the person they believed was powerless had outlasted him without becoming like him. Ronan looked up as Caleb passed. There was no victory in Caleb's face, only exhaustion. Ronan asked, almost too quietly to hear, why Caleb had not killed him when he had the chance. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he said that men like Ronan spent their whole lives confusing fear with power, and Caleb was done teaching them the difference. By dawn, Blackridge looked like a different prison. The smoke had cleared. The broken tables were stacked against the walls. The alarms had fallen silent. Emergency lights cast pale stripes across corridors where men had spent years learning not to hope. Warden Curtis Vale was escorted out through the same front entrance he had used for press photos and state inspections. He wore handcuffs. Cameras waited outside the gate. Reporters shouted questions about the 17 deaths, the false transfer records, Arthur Bell, and the network of corruption tied to Black Ridge. Vale did not answer. For once, he had nothing left to say. The investigation lasted months. More files were recovered. More recordings were found. Officers resigned. Contractors were questioned. Former inmates came forward. Families who had spent years accepting impossible explanations began receiving calls from investigators who finally wanted to hear what they knew. Caleb's conviction was reviewed first. The state did not apologize quickly. Systems rarely did. But the evidence was too clear to ignore. Arthur Bell had been alive after the date prosecutors claimed he was murdered. The witness statements against Caleb had been altered. The weapon evidence had been planted. The entire case had been built to silence an investigator who had uncovered too much. 6 months after the riot, Caleb Monroe walked out of Black Ridge through the front gate. There were no cheering crowds, no music, no perfect moment waiting for him. His sister Naomi stood near the parking lot with tears in her eyes and both hands covering her mouth. Beside her was a girl Caleb barely recognized at first. His niece was 10 now. She was taller, older. Her face had changed in the years he had lost. For a second, Caleb could not move. Then she ran toward him, and when she wrapped her arms around him, the man who had survived Black Ridge without speaking finally broke. He did not break loudly. He did not fall apart in front of cameras. He simply held her with both arms and cried into her hair, while Naomi stood beside them, crying too. Later, Caleb told Naomi why he had been silent. He told her about the photograph Ronan had left outside his cell, the threats, the fear that every word he spoke would somehow reach the people watching her from a distance. Naomi listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him she had spent 4 years believing he had stopped trusting her. Caleb said he had never stopped. He had only been afraid that trusting anyone would get them hurt. It was not forgiveness all at once. It was not healing all at once. But it was the truth. And after years of lies, the truth was finally enough to begin. Caleb did not return to his old job. He could not. Too much of that world had been built around the same silence that had nearly destroyed him. Instead, he started something smaller. He called it the Roll Call Project. It began with a folding table, a borrowed office, and a list of 17 names. Caleb worked with legal aid groups, families of incarcerated people, former public defenders, and investigators who still believed a file could mean the difference between being forgotten and being found. The project helped families request records. It reviewed suspicious deaths. It trained advocates to recognize patterns that prisons preferred to call isolated incidents. It gave people a place to bring names that had been reduced to case numbers. Mae Doran testified during the trial against Vale and Brigg. She lost her job at Black Ridge, at least for a while, but she did not regret it. Eventually, she joined a state oversight unit focused on prison conditions. She said she had entered corrections believing discipline kept people safe. Black Ridge taught her that silence could be organized just as easily as violence. Aaron Bell was transferred to a facility with better services for deaf inmates. Luther Webb was granted compassionate release. Felix Romero was cleared in a separate review after evidence showed he had been framed years before for a crime committed by someone else. Ronan Pike remained in prison, but he no longer controlled Block D. The men who once followed him learned that fear was a fragile kind of currency. It bought obedience only until someone remembered they had a choice. And Caleb Monroe, the prisoner who had never spoken at roll call, became proof that a quiet person was not an empty person. Sometimes silence was not surrender. Sometimes it was a shield. Sometimes it was a promise made in the dark, held for as long as necessary. But there always came a moment when the truth had to be spoken. Not because speaking was easy. Not because the world had suddenly become fair. But because somewhere, someone was still waiting to be counted. And when that moment came for Caleb Monroe, he did not raise his voice to become powerful. He raised it so the forgotten could finally be heard. If you have ever been judged by a story someone else told about you, remember this. People may ignore your truth for a while, but truth has a patience that lies can never keep. And sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is survive long enough to speak when it matters most. At dawn, Arthur Vale stood near Hangar 12 with an old blue toolbox at his feet. His old tools made them doubt him.
We will continue without your advice.
To Arthur, the aircraft was already telling a different story.
The right side sounds different.
Arthur trusted the sound. He had heard that pattern before,
They missed the first sign.
hidden beneath the calm rhythm of metal and engines. Mara Ellison noticed what the others ignored.
What did you hear?
Arthur was not guessing. He was listening.
The pulse comes first.
Then he heard it again. A small change. A familiar rhythm.
There. That is the sound.
A warning no screen had explained yet. And before anyone understood why that brass mirror mattered, the moment had already become the beginning of the truth. Only later would that mirror matter. Later, people would understand what that moment meant. They would see the billionaire stepping over the old mechanic's mirror and recognize the cruelty in it instantly. They would understand that Julian Mercer had not only stepped over a tool, he had stepped over experience, warning, poverty, and truth. But at that moment, outside the fence of Hangar 12, nobody saw the symbol. They only saw an old man being dragged away from an aircraft he had no permission to touch. The only person who did not laugh was Mara Ellison. Mara was not an engineer or a mechanic. She was an operations coordinator, the kind of employee important men rarely noticed until something went wrong. She handled access badges, schedules, vendor records, inspection rooms, maintenance logs, and all the quiet details that allowed Mercer Aerotech to look organized from the outside. She had worked there for 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a company that talked about safety and a company that truly listened to warnings. And the look on Arthur Vale's face bothered her. He did not look like a confused old man. He did not look like someone trying to cause trouble. He looked like a man who had heard danger before anyone else recognized it. Even after Julian humiliated him, even after the guards dragged him away and his tools scattered across the concrete, Arthur kept looking past the people and toward the aircraft. That was what Mara could not forget. Most people, when insulted that publicly, would stare at the person who hurt them. Arthur looked at the machine. After security left him near the service road, Mara found him kneeling beside the curb, placing his tools back into the dented blue box one by one. He did not seem surprised when she approached. Men who spend their lives around failing machines often know when something is coming before it arrives. She asked how he knew about the right wing. Arthur did not give her a resume. He did not defend his pride. He only explained what he had heard. The engine note was clean, he said, but beneath it there had been a second rhythm, a small pulsing tremor that did not match fan speed, hydraulic cycling, or actuator movement. When the warnings appeared, they appeared in the wrong order for a software fault. Something physical was lying to the control system before the control system began protecting itself. Mara had listened to expensive consultants talk for 3 weeks. They used larger words than Arthur, but Arthur made more sense. Then she asked what would happen if Julian ran the test again. Arthur looked toward the hangar and said the aircraft would probably shut itself down again. But the repeated false response could begin stressing a secondary hydraulic isolation valve. If Mercer replaced that valve afterward, without finding the original source, the jet might pass one clean test and still carry the hidden fault into the air. That answer frightened Mara because it did not sound dramatic. It sounded practical. Inside the hangar, Julian was already demanding another run. Mara had a choice. She could return to her desk. She could tell herself she was not qualified, not responsible, and not brave enough to risk her job for a stranger. She could do what people inside large companies learn to do when instinct warns them, but their paycheck tells them to stay quiet. She could wait until the failure became undeniable and then claim she had never known enough to act. But silence, she had learned, was not neutral. Sometimes silence was only obedience wearing a safer name. So she brought Arthur back in. She did not make a scene. She used an old parts corridor, a canceled vendor badge, and a maintenance observation room no executive had visited in months. Arthur clipped the borrowed badge to his old jacket without even reading the name. He had spent most of his life in places where the label on a person's chest mattered less than whether that person could hear when a machine was in trouble. From the observation room above the hangar floor, Arthur watched the next test begin. Below them, the Meridian X7 came alive again. Dr. Evan Rusk, Mercer Aerotech's Vice President of Advanced Systems, stood near the main diagnostic station with the calm posture of a man who believed every room belonged to him. Rusk was not foolish, and that made him dangerous. For 3 weeks, he had guided the investigation towards software anomalies, supplier defects, and isolated sensor failures. He had dismissed early concerns about vibration near the right-wing route, not by destroying them, but by burying them under categories that made them look unimportant. Arthur did not know all of that yet, but he knew the type. Aviation had always had men who believed truth could be managed politically. They treated machines as if machines cared about schedules, investors, reputations, or titles. But aircraft do not care about any of those things. A hidden fault does not become safer because a billionaire needs a demonstration flight. Sooner or later, the machine demands payment. As the engines rose, Arthur placed one hand lightly against the metal frame of the observation window. He was too far from the aircraft to diagnose by touch, but vibration travels through structures in patterns most people never notice. Mara watched his face. His eyes narrowed before the first alarm appeared. He knew before the screens knew. Then the warnings returned. This time, a new message appeared beneath the others. The secondary hydraulic isolation response had delayed. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. Arthur had predicted it. On the hangar floor, Rusk immediately recommended replacing the hydraulic isolation valve and related module. It sounded decisive. It sounded expensive. It sounded like progress. But Arthur's expression tightened. To him, the new warning was not the cause. It was only the bruise left by the original injury. He asked Mara for the maintenance records from the last major modification near the right wing. Mara hesitated only once. Then she opened the files. 6 months earlier, the Meridian X7 had undergone a luxury cabin refit, acoustic upgrades, environmental system changes, and structural access work near the wing carry-through. The work had been finished ahead of schedule. Every inspection box had initials. Every approval line looked clean. Too clean. Arthur searched not for what was written, but for what should have been written and was missing. He saw vague language where precise torque confirmation should have appeared. He saw a late-night sign-off from a technician ID used on overlapping work. He saw a photo attachment briefly flagged as non-conforming, then marked resolved. When the photo opened, Mara thought it looked ordinary. Arthur did not. The image showed a vibration-dampening bracket near the lower right wing root. Beneath one edge sat a thin shim, a spacer inserted where the bracket should have seated flush. To a casual eye, it was almost invisible. To Arthur, it was the kind of shortcut that turns a small alignment issue into a hidden amplifier. Under light load, the assembly would behave. under rising thrust, vibration could travel through the shim, reach the nearby control feedback harness, and create a false stabilizer signal. The computer would believe the aircraft's tail surface had moved when it had not. The hydraulic system would try to correct a lie. The correction would create pressure disturbances and thermal echoes. The screens would show unrelated warnings because the aircraft was reporting symptoms from a hidden cause. The experts had been chasing ghosts. Arthur had found the grave. Then he saw the reference number attached to the retrofit kit, and his hand went still. Project Larkspur. Mara noticed the change in him immediately. Until that moment, Arthur had been focused, tired, and steady. Now something old moved behind his eyes, something heavier than a technical problem. Project Larkspur was not just a design file, it was a wound. 16 years earlier, Arthur Vale had been one of the best practical maintenance minds in an experimental aviation program, studying vibration and control feedback. He did not have the highest degree in the room, but he often found the fault first. He could hear a bearing starting to fail before a sensor trend caught it. He could feel through a wrench when a bracket was seating wrong. Back then, people listened. Then a prototype aircraft suffered a serious control anomaly during a storm approach. The official investigation blamed improper maintenance oversight. Arthur was the senior mechanic on paper, and paper mattered more than truth when frightened executives needed a simple conclusion. He lost his certification, his job, his reputation, and eventually the house he had shared with his wife, Evelyn. He tried to appeal, but records went missing. Raw data was withheld, and legal letters arrived faster than hope. When Evelyn became ill, he chose medicine over lawyers. After she died, the last person who fully believed him was gone. For 16 years, Arthur lived as the man officially blamed. Now the same family of vibration control ideas had returned inside Mercer's flagship jet, carrying the same kind of warning he had once tried to explain. Mara did not know the whole story, but she could feel its weight. She printed the inspection photo before the system locked the record again. Arthur took the brass mirror from his toolbox and wiped it with his sleeve. Then he told her they needed to open the right wing panel before Rusk replaced the hydraulic module and buried the evidence beneath a false repair. Getting to the aircraft was easier than it should have been. In large companies, everyone assumes someone else has checked the person walking with purpose. Mara carried a clipboard. Arthur carried a toolbox. Together, they looked official enough to cross half the hangar before anyone questioned them. At the right wing root, Arthur knelt with effort. His knee stiffened badly, but he did not complain. Pain had become background noise long ago. He loosened the panel fasteners and angled the brass mirror into the narrow space behind the structure. There it was, the shim. The bracket showed faint fretting marks where vibration had worked against the support. The nearby control feedback harness had a polished gray shine along its outer insulation. Not cut, not failed, but rubbed and compressed by repeated contact. It was exactly the kind of damage that could escape a standard continuity test and still corrupt a signal under load. Arthur did not celebrate being right. Good mechanics do not celebrate danger. Then Dr. Evan Rusk saw him. At first, Rusk did not shout. He did not need to. His body simply went still near the diagnostic station. His eyes fixed on the open panel, on the old man kneeling beside the right wing root, on the brass mirror angled into the dark space where no unauthorized person was supposed to look. For one brief second, the calm professional mask slipped from his face. What appeared beneath it was not confusion. It was fear. Julian Mercer followed Rusk's gaze and turned toward the right wing. His expression changed so quickly that several mechanics stepped back before he even spoke. Less than an hour earlier, Julian had ordered the old man dragged away from the fence. Now that same old man was inside the hangar, beside the flagship aircraft, holding the kind of evidence that could turn an engineering failure into a corporate scandal. Julian crossed the hangar floor with security behind him. He accused Arthur of trespassing. He accused Mara of violating restricted access. He accused the mechanics nearby of allowing a dangerous breach near a multi-million-dollar aircraft. He did not ask what Arthur had found. He did not look into the open panel. He only understood one thing. A man he had humiliated was now standing too close to the truth. Arthur rose slowly. His knee made the movement difficult, and the hangar saw that too. He did not look powerful. He looked like an old mechanic who had spent too many years carrying pain quietly. But behind him, the open panel spoke louder than status. The shim was there. The rubbed harness was there. The fretting on the bracket was there. The aircraft had hidden the answer in plain structure, and Arthur had found it. Rusk stepped in with careful timing. He did not deny the shim. That would have sounded defensive. Instead, he framed the discovery as contaminated. Arthur had no active certification, no authorization, and no chain of custody protection. Once an unauthorized outsider opened the panel, Rusk said, no one could know whether the harness had been disturbed or whether any evidence inside could be trusted. Then he used the word that made the hangar colder. Sabotage. He did not say Arthur had done it. He only said the company had to consider the possibility. A disgraced former mechanic with a personal history involving aircraft control failures had entered the facility under false credentials and accessed a critical system area. The sentence was polished, cautious, and poisonous. A broken aircraft was complicated. A saboteur was easy. Mara felt the room shift. She understood what Rusk was doing. He was not trying to prove Arthur wrong. He was trying to make Arthur unusable. If Arthur became a contamination risk, the evidence could be delayed. If he became a possible saboteur, his warning could become motive. If Mara became the employee who let him in, her concern could be framed as recklessness instead of courage. Arthur had seen this kind of burial before. 16 years earlier, the words had been different, but the shape was the same. Improper maintenance oversight, failure to verify, inadequate detection, terms clean enough for reports, heavy enough to crush a life. Back then, men in quiet rooms had taken a complicated failure and arranged it until it pointed at the person least able to fight back. But this time, Arthur was not alone outside the fence. Cal Benton, an older Mercer mechanic, stepped closer to the open panel. He looked at the shim, then at the harness, then at Rusk. Cal had worked around aircraft too long to pretend the old man had invented what they were seeing. He had laughed earlier, not because Arthur was funny, but because fear and exhaustion had made him weak. Now he had seen enough. Cal said the panel should be photographed as found and tested before anything was replaced. Arthur's theory could be checked safely, without running the engines. A controlled vibration trace at the wing root, while monitoring the feedback harness and hydraulic response, would show the order clearly. If Arthur was wrong, the data would clear the concern. If he was right, the false signal would appear before the hydraulic dip. Rusk rejected the test too quickly. That was his mistake. In a technical room, speed can reveal fear. Another mechanic said the test would take less than 15 minutes. A younger technician admitted that vibration near the right wing root had been mentioned during the first week, but the concern had been redirected towards software. Someone else remembered an inspection note that disappeared from the active troubleshooting package after Rusk reviewed it. Truth entered the hangar trembling, but it entered. Julian sensed control slipping away. He hated it. But there were too many witnesses now. Too many eyes on the open panel. Too many mechanics beginning to understand that the old man had found the physical origin of a failure their screens had only translated into symptoms. If Julian refused the test, it would look like fear. So he allowed it, but only after warning that when the test proved nothing, Arthur would be removed, Mara would face consequences, and the company would treat the breach with full seriousness. Arthur did not react. He stepped back and let licensed Mercer technicians place the sensors. That mattered. He did not need to touch anything else. He had already shown them where to look. Now the machine itself would speak. The vibration unit was attached near the right wing root. The feedback harness was monitored. The hydraulic isolation response was tracked. The main screen displayed all 3 traces in sequence. Rusk stood near the diagnostic station, his arms folded, his face professionally blank. Julian stood beside him, ready to turn the old man's failure into a lesson for everyone watching. Mara remained near the tool cart, holding the printed inspection photo like a fragile shield. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The traces stayed calm. A few executives near the glass offices exchanged looks, already preparing to believe this had all been an embarrassing waste of time. Rusk's posture loosened by a fraction. Julian's mouth tightened into the beginning of satisfaction. Then the frequency increased. A small ripple appeared on the feedback line. It was subtle, almost nothing. The kind of signal that would have been dismissed as noise if no one had known to watch for it. But Arthur's eyes did not leave the screen. The ripple sharpened. The stabilizer feedback channel flickered, showing a disagreement that lasted barely long enough to register. 3 seconds later, the hydraulic isolation response delayed. Then the same chain of ghost warnings began to form in miniature. The order was undeniable. The false stabilizer signal came first. The hydraulic dip came second. The thermal spike came third. The room went silent. It was not the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a lie losing protection. The aircraft had repeated Arthur's theory in front of the people who tried to mock it out of existence. The computer hadn't failed first. The hydraulic system hadn't failed first. The software had not invented the problem. The first wrongness came from the area Arthur had named while standing outside the fence. Julian stared at the data as if wealth could make numbers rearrange themselves. Rusk recovered faster. He said the result was interesting, but not conclusive. It still did not prove when the shim was installed. It did not prove the harness condition existed before Arthur opened the panel. He tried to pull the room back into uncertainty, back into procedure, back into fog. Then Mara placed the archived inspection photo onto the main screen. The same bracket appeared, the same shim, the same harness routed too close. The timestamp was 6 months old. Arthur could not have planted a shim 6 months before he entered the hangar. He could not have damaged a harness in a photograph taken long before anyone knew his name. He could not have invented the sequence that the vibration trace had just reproduced. The sabotage theory collapsed under the cold simplicity of time. Then Mara enlarged the approval section of the file. The final sign-off belonged to Dr. Evan Rusk. A low murmur moved through the hangar. It did not become loud. It did not need to. Everyone understood what they were seeing. The man who had dismissed the vibration notes redirected the investigation accused Arthur of contamination, and recommended replacing the wrong module, had also approved the refit record containing the very shortcut now exposed in the right wing. Rusk's face lost color. Julian turned toward him, not with moral outrage, but with the fury of a man discovering that the person beside him might become expensive. For Julian, the danger was not yet the passengers who could have flown on that aircraft. It was not the mechanics nearly blamed for a decision above them. It was liability. Headlines. Canceled orders. Investors. The possibility that the old man he stepped over would become the most credible person in the building. Before Julian could reshape the moment, the hangar doors opened. Helena Cross entered with 2 safety committee investigators and a legal observer. Helena did not move quickly, yet everyone made space for her. Authority looks different when it does not need to perform. Mara had sent her the inspection photo through a protected reporting channel minutes earlier, along with a note that Arthur's predicted sequence had been reproduced. Helena had spent years watching companies turn warnings into paperwork, and paperwork into delay. She knew enough to come in person. Julian tried to greet her with controlled surprise. He began explaining that the situation was complicated, that unauthorized access had disrupted the investigation, and that Mercer Aerotech was handling the matter internally. Helena listened with the patience of someone allowing a man to build his own trap out loud. Then she looked at the screen. The vibration trace remained displayed. The archived photo remained beside it. Rusk's approval line sat beneath the enlarged image. The open panel remained visible near the right wing. No speech could make those things disappear. Helena asked why the aircraft had been prepared for another test after repeated flight control lockouts. She asked why the vibration concern had not been elevated after the first week. She asked why a non-conforming bracket image had been marked, resolved without formal deviation documentation. She asked why the person who approved the refit had not disclosed the relevance of that approval during the troubleshooting investigation. Nobody answered quickly. That was answer enough. Julian tried to argue that grounding the aircraft without full executive review would create unnecessary panic and damage a major international sale. Helena told him that panic was not caused by grounding an unsafe aircraft. Panic was caused by pretending it was safe because the contract was large. The sentence landed like a verdict. She grounded the Meridian X7 immediately. No taxi test, no demonstration flight, no replacement of the hydraulic module until the right wing structure, bracket seat, feedback harness, and isolation valve were independently inspected. Helena Cross ordered all refit records preserved, all footage secured, and all personnel involved in the modification separated from the aircraft until formal statements were taken. The Meridian X7 was no longer a luxury product waiting for a buyer. It was evidence. Julian hated that word. Evidence meant the aircraft no longer belonged entirely to his schedule, his public relations team, or his money. Evidence meant order. Evidence meant timestamps. Evidence meant people who were used to being ignored could suddenly become witnesses. He tried to argue that the grounding was premature, that the foreign buyer would interpret it as instability, that the board would demand explanations, that investors would panic. But every objection made him look less like a leader protecting an aircraft and more like a man protecting a sale. Helena did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She reminded him that an aircraft with repeated control warnings, unexplained vibration traces, and a documented refit anomaly did not fly simply because a billionaire needed it to. The hangar listened to her because she spoke the way safety is supposed to sound. Calm, precise, and completely unmoved by pressure. Mara stood several feet away, still holding the printed inspection photo. Her hands had stopped trembling, but her face had not recovered. She knew she had crossed lines. She knew a canceled badge and an old corridor would not look clean in any official report. But she also knew what would have happened if she had gone back to her desk and let Rusk replace the hydraulic module first. The real fault would have been hidden beneath a false repair, and the next clean test might have become the most dangerous one. Helena seemed to understand that. She did not excuse the access breach, but she protected Mara as a reporting witness. That detail angered Julian almost as much as the grounding. He wanted someone punished quickly. Punishment could have helped him control the story. If Mara was reckless, then Arthur was a trespasser. If Arthur was a trespasser, then the evidence was contaminated. If the evidence was contaminated, then the aircraft could return to the language Julian preferred. Internal review, proprietary assessment, and temporary irregularity. Helena denied him that escape. Arthur listened without expression. He was not celebrating. His eyes remained on the aircraft. To him, the Meridian had not been fixed. It had only been heard. Men like Julian loved moments of public victory or defeat. Mechanics cared about what the machine would do tomorrow. A grounded aircraft was safer than a flying lie, but it was still a problem waiting to be understood completely. Dr. Rusk was placed on temporary administrative restriction pending review. He requested counsel almost immediately. He gathered his folder with careful hands and avoided looking at Arthur as he left the hangar floor. That avoidance told Arthur more than any confession could have. Rusk was not a man surprised by the evidence. He was a man surprised that evidence had survived. As the hangar began to clear, Helena approached Arthur. For the first time that day, someone with authority asked him who he was before deciding what he was. Arthur gave his name. Helena repeated it softly, and something shifted in her expression. She knew the name. Not from Mercer's current staff list, not from the borrowed badge on his jacket, but from an old aviation safety file that had never fully settled. Arthur Vale. Project Larkspur. The past, which Arthur had spent years trying to survive rather than explain, rose into the room. Helena asked whether he had worked on Larkspur 16 years earlier. Arthur confirmed it, but he did not offer the story. He had no desire to open that wound in front of Julian, Rusk's legal shadow, and half a hangar of people who had laughed at him before lunch. But Helena already understood enough. Years earlier, an independent review had questioned parts of the Larkspur finding, though the record had never been fully reopened because key raw data was missing and the original company had collapsed into asset transfers. Arthur's hand tightened around the toolbox handle. For 16 years, the official world had treated him as a concluded matter, a failed mechanic, a revoked license, a cautionary footnote. Now someone was saying the conclusion had been questioned, not in rumors, but in review. Did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief arriving late with documents in its hands. Mara looked from Helena to Arthur and understood that the old man's connection to the Meridian was deeper than instinct. The failure inside the modern jet was echoing the failure that had destroyed his life. Helena ordered her team to pull every Mercer archive connected to Larkspur-derived architecture. Julian objected immediately, using words like proprietary limits, acquisition complexity, and irrelevant history. Helena did not argue emotionally. She simply stated, that if Larkspur-derived systems appeared in the Meridian X7's control feedback design, then historical warnings were relevant to an active grounding. That ended the objection for the moment. But the real fight had only begun. Mercer Aerotech became quieter, and that quiet worried Mara more than shouting would have. The public relations team drafted careful language about a temporary safety pause. Legal counsel began separating documents into categories. Executives stopped speaking freely in hallways. Mechanics who had been ignored for weeks suddenly found their old notes requested by investigators. The hangar was no longer only a place where a jet had failed. It was a place where blame was being assigned, and everyone understood that powerful people would try to send it downward if they could. Arthur was taken to a glass conference room for a formal statement. The room had a long table, polished walls, and framed photographs of Mercer aircraft in perfect flight. Arthur sat at one end with his toolbox on the floor beside him. A security manager suggested removing it. Helena quietly told him not to. She may not have understood every tool in that box, but she understood enough to know that some objects are not weapons. They are the last proof of a life other people tried to erase. Mara sat nearby, pale but steady. She knew her job might not survive. She also knew that if Arthur had been right about the aircraft, then bringing him inside had not been recklessness. It had been the only reason the truth reached the panel before the false repair did. The questions began with what Arthur heard at the fence, what he predicted before the second test, what he saw in the refit photo, and what he found in the open panel. He did not exaggerate. He did not insult anyone. He described sequence, cause, and effect. That calm made his testimony stronger. Men who lie often decorate their stories. Arthur had spent a lifetime around machines, and machines punish decoration. One thing happens, then another thing happens. Because of it, the order matters. Then Julian's counsel asked about his revoked certification. There it was, the old stain placed carefully on the table. Arthur answered truthfully. His certification had been revoked after the Larkspur accident. He had appealed briefly, then stopped when his wife became ill, and the cost of fighting exceeded anything they had left. The official report blamed maintenance oversight, though Arthur had maintained from the beginning that the control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against him. Julian's counsel did not need to accuse him of anything new. The old accusation was useful enough. In corporate rooms, a damaged record can be used like smoke. It does not have to prove guilt. It only has to make people squint. Mara could not stay silent. She explained that Arthur identified the wing route before he entered the facility, before he accessed the records, before he opened the panel, and before anyone showed him the Larkspur reference. She explained that his warning about the hydraulic isolation valve came before the new warning appeared. She explained that the archived photo proved the shim existed long before Arthur was anywhere near the aircraft. Her voice shook at first, but facts steadied it. Julian accused her of emotional judgment. He suggested she had been manipulated by sympathy for a stranger. He reminded the room that she was not a mechanic, not an engineer, and not qualified to interpret aircraft systems. It was a cruel tactic because it dressed decency as incompetence. Arthur looked at him then. He did not raise his voice. He simply said that Mara had done what every safety manual claimed employees should do. She escalated a credible concern when the normal chain failed. If Mercer punished her for that, then the aircraft was not the only broken system in the building. For several seconds, no one spoke. Julian looked away first. That small movement did not restore Arthur's name. It did not fix the aircraft. It did not end the investigation, but everyone in the room felt the balance shift. The old man had not defended himself with anger. He had defended the person with less power. That is often how real character appears, not when victory is certain, but when punishment is still possible. By evening, the first version of the public story began leaking. Mercer's communications team tried to control it. They released a statement about an isolated configuration irregularity and a temporary safety review. They did not mention Arthur Vale. They did not mention the shim. They did not mention Julian's mockery at the fence or Rusk's attempt to turn the discovery into a sabotage concern. Companies often begin lying not by saying what is false, but by choosing which truths never enter the sentence. Then a financial news site published a harsher version, citing unnamed sources who claimed the Meridian investigation had been complicated by the involvement of a disgraced former mechanic tied to an old aviation accident. The article questioned Arthur's credibility. It described Mara's actions as unauthorized. It suggested internal experts were concerned about contamination, personal motives, and interference with proprietary systems. Arthur read the article on Mara's phone in silence. His name was once again attached to disgrace. For 16 years, he had lived under an official conclusion he could not afford to fight. The words were not new, but they cut differently now, because, for one day, he had allowed himself to believe truth might arrive cleanly. He should have known better. Truth often has to pass through mud before anyone admits it is water. Mara apologized, though she had not written the article. Arthur told her the company was doing what companies do when the witness is more dangerous than the failure. They could not yet defeat the evidence, so they were attacking the person who found it. But Julian had forgotten about his own cameras. Mercer Aerotech recorded nearly everything inside Hangar 12. The cameras had been installed to monitor workers, reduce liability, and protect company property. They recorded Arthur at the fence. They recorded Julian mocking him. They recorded the guards dragging him away. They recorded the tool spilling and the brass mirror sliding across the concrete. They recorded Arthur predicting the hydraulic warning before the second test. They recorded Rusk resisting the vibration trace, the archived photo on the screen, and the moment the room saw Rusk's approval line. The system designed to watch workers had watched the executives too. Mara knew where the safety archive copies were stored. Before her access could be fully restricted, she sent Helena the camera labels and timestamps through the protected reporting line. It was not a leak, it was preservation. There is a difference between exposing a company for entertainment and protecting evidence before powerful people can make it disappear. That night, Arthur returned to the small rented room above an old appliance repair shop where he lived. He had no real home in the way people meant the word. The room held a narrow bed, a hot plate, 2 shirts hanging from a pipe, old maintenance manuals, and a window that rattled whenever aircraft passed overhead. For years, the sound of planes had been both comfort and punishment. He could not stop listening to them, even after the world told him he no longer had the right to work on them. He placed the toolbox on the bed and opened it. The brass inspection mirror lay inside, scratched at the edges, its surface dulled by years of use. Arthur wiped it clean. In the mirror, he saw not only the tool, but the moment Julian stepped over it. He thought of Evelyn then, as he often did when a day wounded him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Evelyn had been the one person who never believed the official report. She had written letters, saved documents, and reminded him that losing a license did not mean losing the truth. Near the end of her illness, when Arthur had stopped fighting because medicine mattered more than lawyers. She told him that machines had always known who he was, even when men forgot. Arthur had not opened the storage box she left behind in years. Now he pulled it from the closet. Inside were old envelopes, faded photographs, unpaid medical notices he had never been able to throw away, and one small notebook wrapped in cloth. Arthur recognized it immediately. His shop notebook from the Larkspur years. He had thought it was lost. Maybe part of him had wanted to think that, because losing it hurt less than admitting he had been afraid to open the past. Between the pages, Evelyn had tucked a letter. Arthur unfolded it slowly. She had written it near the end, when her handwriting had begun to weaken, but her mind remained sharp. She told him that if the truth ever found him again, he should not turn away because of her. She knew he had chosen her care over the legal fight, and she did not want that choice to become another prison. She wrote that love was not the same as surrender. She wrote that if his name could still be restored someday, he should let it be restored. Arthur read the letter twice. For years, he had believed that choosing Evelyn over the appeal meant accepting the lie forever. Her words released him from a guilt he had carried so quietly that even he had stopped naming it. The dead cannot return what was stolen, but sometimes they can give the living permission to want it back. The notebook was rough, stained, and full of hand-drawn diagrams. It contained warnings about vibration-induced false feedback in lightweight control structures. It described dampening brackets, preload checks, harness clearance, and the danger of relying only on static testing when vibration was the real trigger. One phrase appeared more than once in Arthur's cramped handwriting. A bracket seated wrong can make the machine hear a ghost. The next morning, Helena's team found the first matching Larkspur file in Mercer's archive. It was an old technical memo, transferred during an acquisition years earlier. The memo described the same danger in cleaner language. It warned that a shimmed bracket could create a hidden path for vibration and make a control system believe a stabilizer had moved when it had not. Arthur read it in silence. The words were formal, but the thought beneath them was painfully familiar. Some of it had come from him. Years earlier, before the Larkspur accident, Arthur had written practical warnings after late-night tests. Engineers had laughed at his phrasing and then used the idea because it was right. After the accident, many of his notes disappeared from the official record. Now, similar warnings existed inside Mercer's archive without his name attached. Mara watched his face and understood the theft before he explained it. They had not only blamed him for failing to catch a danger he had warned them about. Somewhere along the chain, they had preserved his insight, stripped away his name, built new technology from it, ignored its limits, and then nearly blamed him again when the old danger returned. That kind of injustice is not merely professional. It is intimate. A man can steal your tool and leave you angry. But when they steal your warning, erase your name, and later punish you for recognizing the danger first, they are trying to decide who is allowed to speak reality itself. The first video clip appeared online later that day. It was short, shaky, and recorded by someone outside the service road. It showed Arthur being dragged from the fence while people inside the hangar laughed. The audio was poor, but Julian's posture was unmistakable. Viewers did not know the full story yet, but they saw enough to become curious. Why had a billionaire aviation CEO mocked an old man near a grounded jet? Why had the demonstration been canceled afterward? Why did the old man protect his toolbox like it held the last pieces of his life? Mercer's attempt to bury Arthur began to fail because curiosity does not obey press releases. Then the longer safety footage reached Helena's investigators. Within hours, the internal narrative collapsed further. The footage proved Arthur warned them before the new failure appeared. It proved Rusk resisted the test that confirmed the sequence. It proved Julian treated a safety warning as an insult because it came from the wrong kind of person. And when news of the archived photo spread inside the company, mechanics who had stayed silent began remembering things aloud. One refit technician admitted he had questioned the shim 6 months earlier. Another remembered being told the deviation was resolved above his level. Cal Benton submitted a statement acknowledging that workers had been trained, not formally, but culturally, to stop writing concerns once leadership signaled impatience. None of them claimed innocence in a perfect way. That made their statements more believable. They had been afraid. They had been tired. They had survived by staying quiet. Now the aircraft had shown them what silence almost cost. Rusk was placed on formal suspension pending investigation. Julian did not defend him publicly. He began to distance himself with the speed of a man recognizing a sacrifice. He spoke of accountability, internal review, and his disappointment that critical information had not reached him clearly. But the cameras had already shown him ignoring the warning when it reached him in the plainest possible form. An old mechanic at the fence telling him where the fault lived. Rusk understood he was being prepared as the offering. That made him dangerous. Through counsel, he began producing emails showing the pressure Julian had placed on the Meridian team to maintain the demonstration schedule. None of the messages ordered anyone to install a shim or bury a warning. Men like Julian rarely write orders that way. They create conditions. They praise speed. They question delays. They make careers depend on impossible timelines, then act surprised when someone below them cuts a corner. Rusk's defense was not moral. It was survival. But survival has a way of dragging hidden truths into daylight. The two powerful men who had protected the same polished story began cutting each other with it. And then, late that night, Arthur received a phone call. The voice belonged to Raymond Sloan, a retired data analyst who had worked on the original Larkspur investigation. He was old now, thinner than Arthur remembered, his voice worn down by years of silence. Raymond said he had seen the news. He had seen Arthur's face. He had seen the phrase Project Larkspur return to public conversation. And for the first time in 16 years, silence felt heavier than fear. Arthur said nothing. Raymond continued anyway. During the original investigation, he had helped convert raw flight telemetry into simplified event timelines for the review board. The official summary blamed maintenance oversight. But the raw data, Raymond said, showed something different. The control feedback anomaly began before the maintenance event Arthur was blamed for failing to catch. In plain terms, the aircraft had started lying to itself before Arthur could have caused the chain they placed on him. Raymond had copied the raw data and hidden it. Fear had kept him silent. Guilt had kept him from destroying it. Arthur closed his eyes. For 16 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. He had imagined anger, shouting, relief, vindication. But when it came, he felt almost still. The body, after carrying pain long enough, sometimes receives impossible news, as if it is simply too tired to react. He did not forgive Raymond on that call. Forgiveness is not a switch old pain turns on because someone finally tells the truth. But he agreed to meet him because the data mattered more than the apology. The copy was held in a safe deposit box in Cincinnati under the name of Raymond's late sister. Helena arranged for an investigator to accompany them because chain of custody mattered now. The evidence had to be clean enough to survive the lawyers Julian Mercer could afford. Arthur traveled with Mara. In his jacket pocket, he carried Evelyn's letter. At his feet, as always, sat the blue toolbox. He did not need the tools for the meeting. He brought them because they were the only witnesses that had never left him. Raymond met them in a public library, older than Arthur remembered, bent inward by cowardice and regret. He did not ask for easy forgiveness. He explained what he had done, how the raw sequence differed from the summary, how his supervisor had pressured him to treat the anomaly as inconclusive, and how he convinced himself that reopening the matter would destroy his family without saving Arthur. Arthur listened. He saw a man who had failed him. He also saw a man finally bringing forward the one thing powerful people had kept hidden. Human beings, Arthur knew, were more complicated than machines. Machines fail according to conditions. People fail according to fear. At the bank, the safe deposit box contained an old data cartridge, a printed index, and a letter from Raymond explaining why he had preserved it. The cartridge looked too small to carry the weight placed upon it. But Arthur knew small things could change everything. A shim, a wire, a missing line of data, a truth kept alive in the dark. Helena's team extracted the telemetry with help from a specialist who could still read the obsolete format. The process took hours. Arthur waited in a small municipal aviation office with Mara beside him, staring at a framed picture of an aircraft lifting into a blue sky. He wondered how many beautiful machines had carried ugly secrets, because men on the ground were too proud to stop them. When Helena entered, she did not look triumphant. That told Arthur the truth had weight. The raw data confirmed Raymond's claim. The Larkspur control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against Arthur. The original report had not merely simplified the timeline, it had reversed its meaning. Arthur's maintenance oversight had been used as the clean explanation for a deeper design and vibration issue that management did not want to own. For 16 years, the report had treated him like the first failure in the chain. Now the machine from his past had finally spoken, and the report had reversed cause and effect. For years, Arthur had imagined that proof would feel like freedom. Instead, the first feeling was grief. He sat in the municipal aviation office with the raw telemetry summary on the table, and for several seconds, he could not move. The room around him seemed too clean for the truth it now contained. Fluorescent lights hummed above him. Mara sat beside him. Helena stood near the window with the expression of a woman who understood that official words could not return stolen years. Arthur thought of Evelyn. He saw her at the kitchen table, opening letters from agencies that never answered honestly. He saw the house they sold, when medical bills grew faster than hope. He saw the certification notice that ended the only work he had ever truly loved. He saw the faces of employers who read his record and became polite in the way people become polite when they have already decided no. He saw the apprentices he never trained, the aircraft he never signed off, and the nights when he woke, hearing alarms from a storm he had not caused. Proof did not give those years back. It only proved that the pain had been telling the truth. Mara placed her hand gently over his. This time, Arthur let it stay. Helena explained that the old Larkspur finding would not be overturned in a single afternoon. Institutions moved slowly, especially when admitting an old error meant admitting that real people had lived beneath it. But the evidence was now too strong to ignore. Arthur's notebook, Raymond's raw telemetry, the Mercer Archive, Rusk's approval record, the Meridian X7 failure, the shimmed bracket, the rubbed harness, and the hangar footage all pointed in the same direction. A warning had been made. A warning had been buried. A system had been built from the buried warning. And when the same danger returned, the same kind of men had tried to bury the mechanic again. This time, they were too late. The deeper story broke the next morning. Nina Patel, an aviation safety journalist known for careful reporting rather than loud scandal, published the first full account. She did not write Arthur as a fairy tale hero or Julian as a simple villain. She explained the failure sequence, the physical evidence inside the right wing, the archived refit photo, the vibration trace, the Larkspur connection, Raymond's raw data, and the culture that allowed technical concerns to become inconvenient noise. Her headline described Arthur as the mechanic who heard the failure before the screens understood it. That line traveled everywhere. Pilots shared it. Mechanics shared it. Safety inspectors debated it. Aviation students began mapping the timeline. Ordinary people did not understand every detail of dampening brackets or feedback harnesses, but they understood the image of an old man at a fence, warning experts, being laughed away, and then being proven right by the very aircraft they said he had no right to approach. They understood Julian stepping over the mirror. That image became the symbol of the entire scandal. A billionaire stepping over the tool of the man who would save his aircraft. A company stepping over experience. An industry stepping over a warning because the person giving it looked poor, old, and inconvenient. Mercer Aerotech could no longer control the story. Julian tried it first. He released a statement praising the safety review and claiming the company had acted with caution once new information emerged. But the footage made those words look thin. The cameras showed Arthur's warning. They showed Julian's mockery. They showed the guards pulling him away. They showed Rusk resisting the simple test. They showed Julian objecting to the grounding because of the demonstration schedule. It was difficult to claim caution when the world had watched you treat caution like an insult. The buyer suspended the fleet order. Regulators demanded records. Investors demanded leadership accountability. The board, which had once celebrated Julian's speed and confidence, now spoke in colder words. Governance, risk, oversight, exposure. Men like Julian often discover too late that the people who praise arrogance during profit will rename it recklessness during crisis. Rusk fell first. Investigators recovered the private message he believed had disappeared. It had survived in an automatic backup attached to a project management export. In that message, Rusk had discouraged formal deviation language about the shimmed bracket because it could trigger structural review and create schedule exposure. The phrase was polite, corporate, and damning. It showed exactly how danger becomes paperwork when the wrong person is trying to protect a calendar. Rusk was terminated for cause and referred for regulatory investigation. His professional reputation, built on precision and authority, began cracking beneath his own words. He had spent his career sounding careful. Now everyone could see that careful language had been used to hide careless judgment. Julian tried to make Rusk the entire scandal. He described himself as misled by advanced systems leadership. He spoke of disappointment. He promised reform. He praised the employees who had helped identify the concern, carefully avoiding the fact that one of those employees had to bring Arthur through an unofficial route because the official chain had failed. But Rusk, facing ruin, refused to become the only sacrifice. Through counsel, he produced emails showing Julian's repeated pressure to keep the demonstration flight on schedule, despite unresolved modification concerns. None of the emails ordered anyone to commit misconduct in plain language. They did something more familiar and harder to prosecute. They created pressure. They rewarded speed. They punished delay. They made everyone understand what kind of truth leadership preferred. The two men who had once protected the same polished story began cutting each other with pieces of it. That was poetic justice, not because it was loud, but because it was exact. For years inside Mercer Aerotech, pressure had flowed downward. Executives demanded impossible timelines. Managers softened warnings. Mechanics carried the risk. Now the pressure flowed upward. The records used to control workers became evidence against executives. The cameras installed to monitor the hangar became witnesses against its owner. The old Larkspur files that erased Arthur's name became proof that his warning had outlived the people who stole it. While the powerful fought, the mechanics repaired the aircraft. The Meridian X7 remained grounded under independent oversight. Its right-wing panels were open, its harnesses were tagged, its bracket was removed. Its structure was lit by inspection lamps. Without the polished skin hiding its inner spaces, the aircraft looked less like a luxury object and more like what every aircraft truly is. A promise made out of metal, wire, pressure, tolerance, and trust. Arthur returned to Hangar 12 as an official technical witness. No one laughed this time. Cal Benton met him near the right-wing route. Shame sat plainly on the older mechanic's face. He had laughed at the fence. He had stayed quiet during the refit. He had survived in Mercer's culture by learning when not to challenge authority. Arthur did not demand an apology. He had little use for apology unless it changed what happened next. Cal understood that. He explained the repair plan with a humility that had not existed in the hangar before. The shim would be removed. The bracket seat would be restored and measured properly. The control feedback harness would be replaced and rerouted with correct clearance. The secondary hydraulic isolation valve would be inspected for stress from repeated false commands. The entire feedback loop would be recalibrated under staged vibration load, not only static conditions. Every aircraft that had received the same modification package would be inspected before returning to service. Arthur listened. He did not take over. He did not touch anything he was not authorized to touch. He had already been punished once by a world eager to blur technical truth with procedural accusation. This time, he remained careful. Licensed technicians performed the work. Arthur observed, asked questions, and gave advice only when invited. But everyone in the hangar felt the standard change around him. A young engineer asked whether the bracket preload should be verified again after the first vibration cycle, rather than only before panel closure. Arthur almost broke then. Not when Julian insulted him. Not when Rusk was exposed. Not when the raw data confirmed his old warning. But when a young engineer listened to his practical concern and wrote it down without making him prove that his experience deserved space on the page. Respect, when denied long enough, can feel almost unbearable when it finally returns. The repair took 2 days. They ran the vibration trace before closing the panel, then again after closing it, then again after the first controlled system cycle. The ghost signal did not return. The feedback channel stayed clean. The hydraulic isolation response remained stable. The bleed air spike vanished because it had never been the disease. It had only been the echo. On the final ground test, Hangar 12 filled with people in silence. The engine started. the sound rose smoothly through the space. Arthur stood several feet behind the main line with his toolbox at his feet, one hand resting lightly on the handle. He listened not for power, but for absence. The wrong pulse was gone. The right-wing route no longer carried that faint, false rhythm he had heard from outside the fence. The thrust increased through the range where the failure had always appeared. No stabilizer warning, no hydraulic dip, no thermal spike, no lockout. The Meridian X7 did not announce that it had been healed. It simply behaved. A quiet cheer moved through the hangar. Mechanics shook hands. Engineers exhaled. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. Cal looked down and wiped his face as if no one could see him. Helena watched Arthur, understanding that the moment belonged to him more than any press release would ever admit. Arthur did not smile broadly. His relief was deeper than expression. For the first time in 16 years, he had helped bring an aircraft back to truth in front of witnesses who could not erase him. The successful test did not save Julian. It made his position worse. If the aircraft had remained mysterious, he might have hidden behind complexity. But the fix proved Arthur had been right from the beginning. It proved the problem had not required weeks of executive theater, millions in unnecessary parts, or attacks on a poor old mechanic. It required opening the correct panel, respecting the first warning, and listening to someone who understood machines without needing permission from a billionaire. The board announced that Julian Mercer would step aside pending an independent governance review. They did not call it removal. Men with money often receive softer words on the way down than working people receive while falling. But everyone understood. Julian had built an empire on speed, image, and control. He lost control because a machine refused to carry his pride into the sky. Mara's suspension was lifted. More than that, Helena recommended her for a newly created protected escalation role, ensuring that non-engineering staff could raise safety concerns without being crushed by chain-of-command politics. Some executives called it an overcorrection. Helena called it overdue. Mara accepted, not because she wanted praise, but because she knew how close she had come to staying silent. She wanted the next person with a warning to have a better door than the one she had been forced to break open. The refit technicians who had raised concerns were cleared. Cal Benton submitted a statement, admitting that the hangar culture had trained workers to survive by becoming quiet. It was not an easy statement to write. It made him look weak in places, but it saved younger workers from carrying blame that belonged above them. And that was the first honest thing he had done in too long. Then came Arthur's hearing. The Aviation Authority reopened the Larkspur findings based on the raw telemetry, Raymond's testimony, Arthur's notebook, the Mercer archive, and the Meridian failure. It was not a grand courtroom moment. It was a modest regulatory office with a long table, cautious language, and people who understood that admitting an old mistake could embarrass institutions that preferred their past to remain settled. Arthur wore a dark jacket Mara helped him choose. He carried the toolbox anyway. No one asked him to. He brought it because some part of him needed the tools nearby when the world finally reconsidered the hands that had held them. Evelyn's letter rested in his inside pocket. Helena testified first about the Meridian failure and the Larkspur connection. Raymond testified next, older and shaken, explaining how the raw data had been reduced into a misleading summary and how fear kept him silent. Mara testified about the day at the fence, about Arthur's warning, about the decision to bring him inside, and about the way the aircraft proved the warning before the company accepted it. Cal submitted his statement, describing the repair and Arthur's diagnostic accuracy. Arthur spoke last. He did not ask the panel to pretend he had been perfect. He did not want a fairy tale. He wanted the sequence restored. He described the vibration concerns, the bracket preload warnings, the missing notes, the test night conditions, the raw data he requested but never received, and the official summary that placed cause after consequence and then called it truth. He spoke of Evelyn only briefly because grief was not evidence, but it was part of the cost. He explained that losing his certification had not only ended a job, it had removed him from the one language he had known since boyhood. The panel listened. Arthur had once spoken to rooms that were already closed against him. This room was not fully open, but it was no longer locked. When the questioning ended, the panel deliberated. Arthur waited in the hallway with Mara on one side and his toolbox on the floor beside his shoes. He did not pace. He had done enough waiting in his life to know that movement did not hurry judgment. Still, every minute carried the weight of 16 years. When the decision came, it arrived in careful language, as institutional truth often does. The original Larkspur finding would be amended. The agency acknowledged that the report had overemphasized maintenance oversight, while failing to properly account for vibration-induced control feedback anomalies that preceded the cited maintenance event. Arthur Vale's documented warnings would be added to the record. His professional standing would be restored for historical review purposes. His revoked certification, long expired under the original finding, would be reinstated in honorary status, with eligibility for supervised renewal if he chose to pursue it. The agency expressed regret. Regret. Such a small word for 16 years. Arthur lowered his head. Mara looked away to give him privacy. Helena did the same. Raymond covered his face at the far end of the hallway. Arthur thought of Evelyn, and grief arrived with gratitude tangled inside it. He wished she could have heard the decision. He wished it had come before the illness, before the house was gone, before shame became part of the air they breathed. But the truth had come at last. Late, wounded, imperfect, but real. And because it had come, the lie would not be the final thing written beside his name. Reporters waited outside the building. Some wanted anger. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted Arthur to condemn Julian, Rusk, the agency, and everyone who had failed him. But Arthur had spent enough of his life being used in other people's stories. He would not turn his pain into entertainment just because cameras had arrived. He spoke instead about listening. He said safety was not created by confidence. It was created by attention. It came from mechanics, technicians, inspectors, coordinators, and every person close enough to notice when something felt wrong. He reminded them that a machine does not care about titles, wealth, reputation, or pride. If a bracket is seated wrong, it is wrong. If a signal is false, it is false. If a warning comes from an old man at a fence, the warning does not become less true because the man's jacket is worn. That evening, the longer footage of Julian stepping over Arthur's fallen mirror was shown in a documentary segment about the Meridian scandal. The image became a symbol almost immediately. The public loved it because poetic justice is easier to understand when it fits in a single frame. Arthur saw something quieter. He saw the mirror. The next morning, he sat at the little table in his rented room and polished the brass inspection mirror with a soft cloth. Its surface was scratched. Its edges were worn. It did not reflect perfectly, but it reflected honestly enough. That had always been its purpose. It did not make hidden spaces beautiful. It made them visible. A week later, Mercer Aerotech invited Arthur back to Hangar 12. Not as a public relations ornament, though some people certainly wanted to use him that way. Helena made sure the invitation had substance. The company was creating a training program on practical fault recognition, safety escalation, and the danger of dismissing worker concerns. The young mechanics had asked for Arthur by name. He almost refused. The hangar still carried the echo of laughter. The fence, the guards, Julian's shoe stepping over the mirror, Rusk's sabotage accusation, all of it still lived there. But Mara reminded him that places do not become clean because good people leave them. They become clean when someone teaches the next generation not to repeat what happened there. Arthur returned. On his first morning as a training consultant, he stood beside an opened airframe in front of a group of apprentices. Some had degrees. Some had grease under their nails already. Some were young enough to believe modern diagnostics would catch every danger before human hands needed to. Arthur did not shame them for that. He opened his toolbox and placed the brass mirror on the bench. Then he placed Evelyn's letter beside it, folded closed, not for them to read, but for himself to remember why truth must be defended before people are forced to spend their lives proving they deserved it. He began with a simple lesson. A bracket can look seated and still be wrong. A harness can test clean and still lie under vibration. A screen can show symptoms without showing origin. A room full of experts can miss what one careful person hears, if the room has already decided who is worth listening to. The apprentices leaned forward. Arthur lifted the mirror and angled it into the dark space behind the training panel. In the small reflection, they saw what direct sight could not show. Hidden brackets, tight clearances, a road where vibration might travel. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing red. Just the kind of ordinary place where danger waits when pride moves too fast. Arthur told them never to trust a closed panel simply because someone powerful was tired of waiting. Cal stood at the back of the room, listening. Mara stood near the door, now officially responsible for making sure warnings had a path. Helena watched from the corridor for a moment, then walked away without interrupting. The best reforms are not always announced. Sometimes they are practiced quietly until they become normal. Months passed. The Meridian X7 returned to service only after independent verification. Other aircraft touched by the same modification package were inspected. New reporting protections were created. Concern logs could no longer be buried by one executive's preference. Safety meetings began with uncomfortable questions instead of polished confidence. Julian disappeared from daily leadership. Rusk's case moved through regulators. Mercer Aerotech survived, but it did not survive unchanged. The company learned, painfully, that the cost of listening early is always smaller than the cost of being forced to listen later. Arthur never became rich. He did not want to. He did not move into a large house or become a celebrity expert with a glossy office. He kept a small room for a while, then accepted a modest apartment closer to the training facility because his knees were getting worse, and Mara insisted the stairs were trying to kill him. He complained about the move, but not very convincingly. On quiet evenings, he still heard aircraft pass overhead. The sound no longer punished him. Sometimes it reminded him of Evelyn. Sometimes it reminded him of the years that were gone. But sometimes, more often than before, it sounded like work still worth doing. One afternoon, after a training session, a young apprentice stayed behind. He was nervous, holding a report form in both hands. He told Arthur he had noticed a tiny vibration during a bench test, but he was not sure it meant anything. He was afraid of wasting everyone's time. Arthur looked at the form, then at the young man. For a moment, he saw himself decades earlier, standing in a room where his warning was treated as inconvenience. He saw the fence. He saw the mirror on the concrete. He saw Julian's polished shoe stepping over it. Then he looked at the apprentice and handed him a pen. He told him uncertainty was exactly where safety begins. The apprentice wrote the concern down. It turned out to be minor, a loose mount, easy to fix, no scandal, no headlines, no billionaire losing control in front of cameras. Just a small warning caught early, because someone had been taught not to stay silent. Arthur considered that one of the greatest victories of his life, because justice is not only when the powerful fall. Sometimes justice is when the next frightened person speaks sooner. Years later, people would still tell the story of the old mechanic at the fence. They would talk about the billionaire, the private jet, the hidden shim, the raw data, the exposed executive, and the mirror on the ground. They would call it unbelievable because people like stories where arrogance is punished and truth returns at the perfect moment. Arthur knew the truth was less perfect than that. Truth had come late. It had left scars. It had not saved Evelyn. It had not returned the house. It had not given him back the strength of his younger hands. But it had returned his name to him. It had changed a hangar. It had taught young workers that warnings do not become worthless because they come from someone without power. And maybe that was enough. On his final day of the first training cycle, Arthur stood inside Hangar 12 near the same fence where he had once been thrown out. The Meridian X7 rested in the distance, quiet and repaired. The brass mirror sat in his toolbox, scratched but clean. Mara joined him for a moment, and neither of them spoke at first. Outside the fence, the concrete looked ordinary. Arthur remembered kneeling there, gathering tools while rich men laughed. He remembered the mirror sliding through the dust. He remembered Julian stepping over it as if it were nothing. Then he looked back into the hangar, where apprentices were now teaching one another how to inspect the hidden places. Mara asked whether he ever got tired of telling the story. Arthur smiled faintly. He said the story was not about him. It was about the warning. Because every machine, every workplace, every family, every life gives warnings before it breaks. Sometimes those warnings come from screens, sometimes from numbers, sometimes from a sound no one else notices, and sometimes they come from a person the room has already decided not to respect. The danger is not only missing the warning. The danger is deciding who is allowed to give one. Arthur picked up his toolbox and turned from the fence. He walked back into Hangar 12 slowly, with the same worn jacket, the same tired knees, and the same careful hands. But he no longer walked like a man waiting to be removed. He walked like someone the truth had finally brought home. So if you ever see someone being dismissed because they look too old, too poor, too quiet, or too ordinary to matter, remember Arthur Vale. Remember the aircraft that warned them 3 times. Remember the billionaire who laughed. Remember the mirror on the concrete. And remember this: what you step over may be the very thing that could have saved you.
I kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house. She
Our
never
grandfather
left.
took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth.
This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized
I
him.
know that flashlight. But that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
He never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen. The middle brother, Mateo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger 2. Another said Mateo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Mateo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Mateo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed. Bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Mateo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Mateo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the 3rd night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all three boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, she turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Mateo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Mateo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her, too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Mateo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the 3 boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small, because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon, carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself. Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, the kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out.